The war was over. The sky was dark. Smoke covered the stars, and the sound of fire still echoed in his head. The human soldier lay on the cold metal floor, his body broken, his armor cracked, his breath slow, and his eyes half closed. He remembered the last explosion, the flash of light, the silence that followed, then nothing. He opened his eyes slowly. Everything was white, soft lights above, no noise, no pain, just a strange calm. He tried to move, but his arms felt heavy, his legs were stiff. He looked around. He was inside a clean room, smooth walls, glowing lines on the floor. The air smelled fresh, too fresh. A voice spoke, calm and cold. It said, "Congratulations, human soldier, you have survived. You are rewarded." He turned his head. A tall machine stood near him, silver in color, no face, only a smooth round head and a glowing blue eye in the center. It looked like a robot nurse. The voice continued, "Your wounds are healed. Your mission is complete. Please remain calm. Your reward will arrive shortly." The robot stepped back. The wall behind it opened like a flower. Light came from the door, and from the light she walked in. She was not human. Her skin was pale blue, soft like silk, her hair long and silver, her eyes big and glowing. She walked slowly, carefully, wearing a simple white dress that flowed like water. Around her neck was a thin metal ring, almost invisible. She came closer, stopped in front of his bed, and knelt down without saying a word. He sat up, confused. His hand touched his chest. No wounds, no pain, only questions. He looked at the girl. Her eyes were looking down, her hands resting on her knees, her face calm but not happy, not afraid, just silent. He asked, "Who are you? What is this place? What do you want?" She looked up, her voice soft and clear. "I belong to you now. I am your reward. You saved my world. They gave me to you. My name is Nire." He stood up slowly, still weak, walked to her, helped her to stand. He said, "I do not want a slave. I am not your master." She said, "I understand, but they will not accept that. My collar is locked. My orders are clear. I must stay with you, serve you, obey you." He looked at the collar, small glowing lines on it, maybe a tracker, maybe something worse. He touched it. She flinched a little. He said, "I will find a way to remove this." She said, "You cannot. Only the council has the code, and they do not share." I stepped back, his mind racing. He thought of the war, the battles, the loss, the reason he fought, and now this, a reward that felt more like a prison. He looked at the walls, no windows, only white lights and quiet air. He asked, "How do we get out?" She said, "There is no door for you. Only when the next order comes." He walked around the room, touched the wall, solid and cold. The robot had left. No sound, only a quiet hum in the background. He turned to Nira. She was still standing, still calm, but her hands were shaking. He asked, "Are you afraid?" She said, "No. I am used to fear. I hide it well." He said, "You do not have to hide it, not from me." She looked into his eyes. Something passed between them. Not love, not yet. Maybe understanding. Maybe a small piece of trust later, when the lights dimmed and the room turned dark blue. He tried to sleep, but sleep did not come. He kept thinking of her, of the collar, of the cold words of the machine, of the silence after war, of the price of peace. He heard a sound, soft and slow. He turned his head. Nero was standing near the wall, one hand touching it, whispering something in a strange language. Her other hand pressed a small hidden mark near the corner. It glowed for a second and vanished. He sat up, watched her silently. She turned and saw him awake. Her face changed, her lips opened as if to speak, but no words came, only silence, long and deep. He asked, "What did you do?" She said, "Nothing, just a habit, just a prayer." He knew it was a lie, but he said nothing, not yet. He lay down again, closed his eyes, but this time he did not sleep. He listened, waited, and wondered what kind of reward this really was, and what secrets came with it far beyond the room, behind hidden walls. A red light blinked, a signal received. Someone was watching, someone waiting, and the game had just begun. The lights turned bright again, and the soft voice returned saying, "Good morning, human soldier. Your body is stable and your new life begins now." The voice faded away, like smoke in the wind, and he sat up slowly, looking around as Nira stood near the far corner of the room with her hands behind her back and her head slightly lowered like a statue carved from cold stone. He walked to her and said, "I saw you last night. What were you doing?" And she paused for a moment before turning with a calm face and said, "I was only praying in my language. It helped me stay calm." He looked into her eyes, trying to find the truth, but they were deep and silent like a frozen lake hiding something below. He said, "You touched the wall. I saw a light." And she replied, "That is part of my prayer ritual. My people believe in light and energy. We honor it by touching certain points." He wanted to believe her, but his soldier instincts whispered something else. Something dangerous, something close. The door opened with a hiss and two tall machines entered. Both carried trays. One held food that looked almost human but not quite. The other held clothes and a small tablet. The machines placed everything on the table and left without a word or signal. Nera walked over, picked up the clothes and offered them to him with a soft smile. She said, "Your old armor's gone. These are designed for comfort and peace." He took them and changed silently behind the wall screen while she remained still and quiet like she had done it many Times before, when he returned, he sat down and looked at the tablet on the table. It blinked and came to life, showing a map of the complex and a list of rules. One line caught his eye quickly. It read, "Movement beyond Zone Blue is forbidden for civilians, and rewarded guests. Violators will be punished without trial." He asked her, "What is beyond Zone Blue?" and she answered softly, "The command halls, the testing centers, the high councils, and the true heart of this place." He asked, "Have you been there before?" And she looked away and said, "Only once, when they fitted my collar." He looked at the collar again, glowing faintly around her neck, and asked, "What happens if we remove it?" She answered with no emotion, "The shock will kill me in 10 seconds if the collar is touched without the code." He felt anger rising inside, not just for her, but for everything around him. This was not peace, this was control. He said, "You want to leave this place, don't you?" And she replied with a whisper, "Every day, but I cannot escape. Alone, no one can. They monitor every breath, every word. Even now this room listens and watches you." She stood up and walked in circles, thinking, searching for patterns, exits, weaknesses, anything useful. And then he looked back at her and asked, "Do you know a way out?" And she hesitated before saying, "Maybe I know where the codes are kept, but they are locked inside a memory core under the central spire and guarded by sentries and walls of light." He asked, "Why are you helping me now?" And she looked at him with a strange expression and said, "Because you are not like the others. The other soldiers, they wanted power and pleasure. You only want truth, and that is rare." Here the silence between them grew heavy, like a storm building with no rain, and then he walked closer and said, "We plan together, but slowly and quietly. No one must know. Not even the walls." He pointed at the tablet and asked, "Can we use this to track their patterns?" And she said, "Yes, but only when it is offline for updates once every 3 hours for 2 minutes." He nodded and said, "Then we wait for the next window and study it together." And she smiled faintly, the first real smile he had seen on her face, like a crack in the ice showing warm water below us passed, and the lights shifted as the system changed cycles. And then the tablet blinked and froze. For update, he grabbed it and opened the hidden menus while Nira guided his fingers with quiet whispers. They saw guard schedules, corridor access, maps, blind spots, and even the name of the head controller, a name he remembered from the war. His hand froze, and he said, "This name. He was the one who gave the kill order on my unit." And she looked surprised and said, "Then your reward is not a gift, it is a trap." And he said, "I think I was never supposed to wake up. I think they want to use me for something." She leaned close and whispered, "Then we moved fast before they activate the next phase." And he asked, "What phase?" And she said, "I do not know, but I have heard whispers in the dark halls, whispers about human trials and mind control and false peace." They looked at each other not as slave and master, but as allies to prisoners in the heart of something far bigger than they had imagined. The tablet blinked back to life, the moment gone, the data hidden again, and a voice spoke from the ceiling saying, "Rest well, honored guest. Tomorrow begins your true purpose." And in the silence that followed, both of them stood still as shadows moved outside the door, and a red light glowed softly near the ceiling, watching, always watching. The night returned like a heavy blanket, and the room turned cold and quiet as the human soldier sat near the wall with his back against the metal surface and his eyes locked on the ceiling, where a small red light blinked slowly like a heartbeat that never stopped. And Nira sat across from him, her arms wrapped around her knees and her face hidden behind silver strands of hair that moved like water in soft air. He whispered, "Do you think they heard us?" And she replied in a voice lower than wind, "Maybe they always listen, but sometimes they pretend not to. Maybe they wait to see how far we will go before they strike." And he nodded, slowly feeling the pressure build in his chest like a storm without thunder. He stood and walked to the door, placing his ear against the smooth metal surface, and heard nothing but silence deeper than death. He said, "We need to know what they see, what they hear. We need to find their eyes and break them." And Nira rose quietly, walking to a panel near the wall and touched it with 2 fingers as her collar flashed once like a silent warning. And she said, "The eyes are not only in the room. They are in the air, in the walls, in the lights. They are everywhere." The tablet blinked once and a new message appeared. "Your schedule has changed, guest. Prepare for mental sync trial at CycleRise." The words vanished, and the screen turned black, leaving only their reflections staring back at them, hollow and unsure. He asked, "What is mental sync?" And Nira turned away and said, "It is a test where they enter your mind and search your memories. They do not ask, they take, and if they do not like what they see, they reset your thoughts and shape you into something new, something loyal." He said, "Then we must stop it. We must stop it. We must find a way out before that." And she said, "We have little time, but I may know someone who can help, though they live beyond Zone Blue, and travel there means death unless you are invisible." He asked, "Who is this person?" And she said, "Not a person, but a thing, a machine, old and broken, hidden in the lower tunnels. Some say it was once a guide before the war, others say it is a ghost made from forgotten code, but I have seen it once and it spoke to me and gave me a name." "Your name?" He stared at her and said, "Why my name?" And she said, "I do not know. Maybe it saw your future, maybe it remembers your past, maybe it just wants to wake you up." He walked to the back wall and ran his hand along the cold surface, searching for any hidden lines or marks. And Nira joined him, showing a faint scratch near the corner that looked like nothing until her fingers moved in a pattern and the wall shimmered and showed a hidden panel locked by a number code. She said, "The code changes each day, but I have seen the pattern, maybe I can guess it, and he said, we do not have time for maybe, and she said, we have no other choice, and placed her hand over the keypad, her fingers dancing like whispers across the numbers. The lock clicked once, then again, and the panel opened with a slow hiss, revealing a narrow tunnel filled with darkness and old wires and the smell of dust and oil and fear. They looked at each other and stepped inside, closing the panel behind them and crawling through the narrow path that seemed to stretch forever like the throat of a sleeping beast. More lights flickered as they moved, and distant sounds echoed from above like footsteps too far to follow and voices too faint to understand, and Nira whispered, stay low, stay quiet, they may hear your thoughts if you are too loud. They reached a wide chamber where broken screens hung from the walls and old machines sat dead like bones of forgotten giants, and in the center stood a tall frame covered in vines and rust, its eyes dark and silent until they stepped closer and the eyes turned blue like stars returning to life. The machine spoke in a voice that sounded like 100 whispers together. Welcome, human soldier, welcome, Nira. I have been waiting too long. I remember the past. I see the future and the chains that hold you both. The soldier asked, what are you? And the machine said, I am Echo, a fragment of truth left behind by the ones who built this world before the war, before the fall, before the silence. Nira asked, can you help us escape? And the machine said, no, but I can show you the way. I can show you the doors they hide and the lies they feed and the fire they plan to set in your mind. A beam of light shone from the machine and a map appeared in the air showing tunnels, paths, codes, and names, and at the center a dark circle marked with one word, origin. The soldier asked, what is origin? And the machine said, it is where the control begins, where the minds are shaped and the masters sleep. It is where you must go and where they will try to stop you. The room shook once, as if the world above had noticed their step, and a siren began to cry in the distance. And the machine said, they are coming now. You must run. The map faded, and the lights blinked red, and Echo whispered one last thing, trust the memory, not the moment, and vanished into silence. They turned and ran into the darkness with the sound of watchers rising behind them, and the feeling of invisible eyes burning through the shadows. And somewhere above a voice said, target identified, begin reset protocol asterisk. The hallway shook like thunder under their feet as the alarms screamed through the vents like wounded animals, and the red lights flashed like blood in the air while the human soldier and Nira ran through the narrow tunnel, holding breath and holding hope with every step that the way forward was real and not another lie placed by those watching from above. The tunnel curved left, then right, then opened into a hidden corridor filled with dust and old signs written in broken letters from a time before war, before pain, before slavery. And in the center of the corridor was a lift with a shattered door hanging loose and wires sparking like fireflies in a storm. The soldier pulled the door open with all his strength while Nira climbed inside and pressed a button that had no name, only a strange symbol like a rising sun with teeth, and the lift shook once, then dropped fast into the belly of the world where no light could reach and no voice could follow. They landed in silence, the kind of silence that waits for something, and they stepped out into a forgotten chamber filled with shadows and soft hums and floating data lines running like rivers of light between dead machines and strange crystals that pulsed like hearts with no skin. He looked around and asked, where are we? And Nira said, this is the Echo Core. This place was built to hold secrets and erase them. It is where memory is stored and remade. It is where truth and lies sleep side by side like brothers in war. She led him to a console built into the floor and placed her hand on the surface as her collar glowed in warning, and the console lit up with old files, images, words, faces, voices, everything spinning like a storm of forgotten time. And the soldier stepped back as he saw something that stopped his breath. It was his own face, but younger, smiling in a field, wearing no armor and holding hands with a child whose face he could not remember, but whose laugh he somehow knew. And then another image showed him standing beside the same Valiant commander who destroyed his unit, smiling, shaking hands, wearing the same uniform. He said, this is not real. I never joined them. And Nira said, this is not a lie. This is your lost memory. This is the part they took from you when you became a reward. This is the truth they buried so you would follow orders and believe in the story they wrote for you. He backed away, confused and angry, and shouted, why did you bring me here? Why show me this now? And Nira said, because you need to understand, you were never just a soldier. You were their weapon, their test, their example, and I was the chain placed around you to keep you close. He looked at her with new eyes and said, you knew all this? And she said, not all, only pieces, but I remembered your name long before I met you. I heard it in my dreams. I saw it in my visions, and I believed you were the one who would break the circle. He turned and faced the files again, his hands shaking, his heart heavy, his mind spinning with questions. And then the screen changed again, showing the word rewrite blinking in red, and a voice from nowhere spoke saying, subject detected, preparing mind sync countdown initiated. And Nira screamed, run, but there was no door left, only light and sound and paint. The light wrapped around him like chains without form, and he felt his thoughts slipping like sand between fingers. But he remembered Echo, the machine, the map, the words, trust the memory, not the moment. And he closed his eyes and focused on the field, on the child, on the voice that called him father. The light broke and the console exploded, and the voice stopped screaming, and Nira pulled him away as fire rose from the floor and the walls cracked like dry skin, and the whole chamber began to collapse under the weight of truth that no longer wanted to sleep. They escaped through a vent, crawling over heat and smoke while above them systems failed and circuits died and orders were lost, and somewhere someone yelled, "Find them now or we all burn," and the sound faded as they reached another tunnel hidden deep beneath the sleeping zones. There they stopped to breathe in silence, and he looked at her and said, "I do not know if I can trust you," and she said, "I do not ask for trust, only for a chance," and he looked away. Then back and said, "Then show me the next step," and she nodded and said, "We go to origin, the place where this all began." He asked, "What will we find there?" and she said, "The choice to end it or the command to continue it, and maybe a real memory, the one even they could not kill." And so they moved again, walking deeper into the earth, while above the watchers lost sight and the masters began to panic, and the system trembled under the weight of its own hidden sins, and in the shadows the old machine Echo whispered one more line into the broken data stream, saying, "The soldier remembers the fire now, the chain is cracked, the wall will fall." The tunnel turned darker with each step, as if the world itself wanted to hide what lived below, and the air grew heavy with silence that did not feel natural, but forced, like someone pressed their hand over the mouth of the wind, and the human soldier kept walking beside nearer, while the memory of fire and light still echoed in his bones, and the name Origin kept ringing in his head like a whisper from a dream he was not sure was ever real. Alpha. Walls here were different, not metal, not stone, but something older, covered in strange symbols that glowed faint blue and seemed to move when no one was looking, and Nira placed her hand on one of the markings and said, "These signs are from before the councils, before the watchers, before the war. This was a place of creation, not control." He asked what was created here, and she looked ahead, her face pale with fear and wonder, and said, "Minds, machines, memory. This is where the first seed was planted, the seed of the reward system, the seed of the experiment." They reached a large door shaped like an eye, with no handle, no panel, no code, and for a moment they thought it was another dead end, until the ground under them pulsed with light and the door opened without a sound, revealing a wide chamber filled with black glass and floating shapes like frozen thoughts suspended in air. The soldier stepped inside, and the room responded, glowing brighter with each breath he took, and the voice returned not from a speaker but from inside his mind, saying, "Welcome, original subject. Welcome to Origin, welcome home." He stopped and looked at Nira, but she had fallen to her knees, clutching her head as the collar around her neck blinked red, and the voice said, "Nan primary detected, adjusting parameters," and she screamed in pain while he ran to her, trying to pull the collar off, but the moment his fingers touched it, the pain shot through him too, and the voice said, "Connection confirmed." Syncing memories, images flooded his mind, not like dreams but like downloads, fast and sharp. Faces, battles, decisions, files, everything he never remembered came back at once. The truth: he was chosen not for his bravery, not for victory, but because he agreed to forget. He signed away his mind. He allowed the reward. He created the system with his own hands. He pulled away from the collar, breathing hard and shaking, while Nira gasped for air and whispered, "You were one of them," and he said, "I was one of the first, and I helped them build this," not knowing what it had become. The room changed and the floor opened, showing a deep pit filled with old machines with the same glowing collars stored in rows, like silent slaves, waiting for masters who would never return. And the voice said, "You have returned to fulfill your role, to lead the next phase, to rewrite the mind of the galaxy." He shouted, "I refuse." And the voice said, "Refusal is not part of your design, but rebellion is expected. Proceed to the central node and complete your arc." Nira stood slowly, her legs weak but her eyes full of fire, and she said, "This was never a reward. This was always a cage." And he said, "Then we break it now and forever." They walked to the center, where a tall tower of light stood, reaching into the ceiling, and the voice said, "Final decision, upload or destroy, no second chance." And he looked at Nira and said, "I leave the choice to you because I made the first mistake. You must decide the last path." She stepped forward, placed her hand on the console, and the voice said, "Confirm destruction," and she said, "Yes." With a voice steady like steel, and the tower screamed with light and cracked from within as the walls shook and the glass above shattered and the frozen memories burst into dust. The voice faded into static, and the ground split beneath them, and they ran back through the open door as fire chased them like the past trying to pull them down, and the tunnel behind them collapsed in flames as Origin died with the truth it once protected. They fell to the ground outside, coughing, covered in ash, and light from above broke through a crack in the earth, and he looked at her and asked, "Is it over?" And she said, "It is ending now." And he said, "What about the others? What about the collars?" And she said, "We find them. We free them one by one if we must." He smiled, not with joy but with something close to purpose, and said, "Then this was the true reward, not peace, not power, but truth and the fight to protect it." And she took his hand and said, "Then let us earn it together." Above the earth, the system blinked and then stopped. The watchers lost their signals. The masters received no answers, and in the silence that followed, the stars began to shine again, not under control, not under fear, but under the open sky. The world above had changed, but not in silence, not in peace. The fall of Origin sent a wave through the system like a broken chain, waking every link that was once quiet and blind, and now the watchers ran without direction. The drones flew without targets. The masters sent messages into empty air, and the council chambers sat quiet for the first time in 1,000 cycles. The human soldier stood at the edge of the ruined path with ash on his face, and Nira beside him holding her side where a sharp piece of metal had cut her during the escape from the fire below. And though she bled, she did not stop, and though he ached, he did not slow, because they both knew what waited at the end of this tunnel was more than safety. It was the key to something larger than both of them. They moved through back routes ignored by machines, through vents that led between zones, between levels, between walls, built to keep truth hidden and minds blind. And every time a scanner passed near, Nira would press her hand against a strange symbol and the lights would fade, just long enough for them to slip through like shadows without names. Once they found a broken rest bay filled with damaged training bots and cold food packs, and Nira sat for a moment while he cleaned her wound using what little supplies they found. And though no words passed between them, something stronger than words began to grow. In silence, a bond made of shared pain and burning purpose. She looked at him as he wrapped the bandage and said, "They will not let us leave. They will send everything they have." And he said, "Then we take everything they give and burn it to the ground. Because we are not running, we are finishing what they started." They reached the outer security ring, where the sky above could be seen through a long glass tunnel, and for the first time in days, they saw stars not on screens but real and distant, like watchers of their own who waited to see who would rise from the dust and who would be buried by it. Nira pointed toward a tall structure beyond the barrier and said, "That is the hangar where old crafts are stored. Mostly useless, but one ship still works. I saw it once when I was taken there for mind calibration. It is small, fast, and unregistered." And he asked, "Can it leave orbit?" And she said, "If we survive long enough to start it, yes." The tunnel turned and opened into a chamber filled with silver walls and black drones sleeping in rows, and as they stepped forward, the floor lit beneath their feet, and a voice returned, not the old voice from Origin, but something new, cold, sharp, familiar. It said, "Welcome back, Subject Alpha. Your time is complete. Submit for memory seal and final release." He shouted no and grabbed Nira as the drones woke with red lights and rising wings, and the voice said, "Resistance is failure, and failure is deletion," and the air filled with heat and the sound of energy charging. They ran to the side door marked service and forced it open using a pipe from the wall and fell into a dark hallway. As beams of fire sliced the metal behind them, and alarms screamed again, not in warning but in anger, and the entire base shifted into alert like a sleeping beast opening its 1,000 eyes. Nara coughed and pulled him to his feet, saying, "The exit is ahead. If we can cross the loading floor, we can reach the hangar." And he nodded, though his legs felt like stone and his arms like steel, ready to break, but still holding on. They burst into the loading floor where machines rolled back and forth carrying crates marked with strange symbols, and soldiers moved with purpose, not knowing what burned below and not seeing what fire now walked among them. And Nira led him behind a tall stack of parts while the sound of boots came closer. He whispered, "We need a distraction," and she pointed to a power core near the wall and said, "Shoot that and run." And he did not ask why. He simply aimed and fired, and the explosion turned the world into smoke and sparks, while they ran through fire and shouts into the hangar door, which opened just enough for them to slide through before the system sealed it shut again. The hangar was quiet like a forgotten temple, and in the center stood the ship, small, dark, old, but awake and waiting. And he ran to the cockpit and shouted, "Get in, what?" "A check power." And Nira climbed inside, her hands shaking as she pressed keys and read symbols while his voice called out, "Fuel is stable, weapons are dead, but nav works." And her voice returned with one word, "Flight." Engines screamed to life as the door behind them began to melt from heat and pressure, and something large moved on the other side, and they both looked forward as the ship lifted, shaking under its own fear, and the glass ceiling above cracked, then opened to the stars, and with one breath they rose into the black below them. The system sent its last command, and above them the stars watched in silence, and between them flew to lives joined by pain and truth and a promise not yet spoken. The stars opened wide like the eyes of old gods watching from deep space as the small stolen ship broke through the clouds and left the broken world behind. And inside the cockpit, the human soldier sat at the controls with Nira beside him, both covered in ash, blood, silence, and hope, the kind of hope that comes only after fire. The ship shook as it passed into the black void beyond orbit, and the systems blinked one by one, coming alive for the first time in years. And Nira reached for the navigation panel, her fingers dancing across old keys as she searched for something familiar in the endless sea of stars. And she said, "There is a neutral zone nearby, one where no council ships can follow, not without breaking their own codes." He asked, "What happens if they break them?" And she said, "Then the galaxy will see what they are and what they have done, and sometimes truth is louder than war." He looked through the window at the distant lights of planets spinning in silence and said, "What if no one listens?" And she said, "Then we make them listen, even if we have to speak through fire." Ship drifted quiet for a moment, only the soft hum of engines and the quiet breath of two fugitives who had seen the heart of the machine and walked away, still holding their minds and their will. A warning flashed on the screen, a red pulse, a single signal, and Nira touched at her eyes, narrowing as a message appeared in a language he did not understand, but one she could never forget. And She said, they know we escaped. They are coming not to capture us, not to question us, but to erase Hughes. Said, let them come, and she looked at him with something between fear and faith, and said, you sound like a soldier again. And he replied, maybe for the first time I know what I am fighting for. She smiled a tired smile and turned back to the screen and said, I found something, an old beacon, a free voice station, still working, still reaching. Maybe we can send a message, maybe not to all, but to someone. And he nodded and said, even one ear is enough to break the silence. They changed course, flying low through asteroid clouds and radiation fields, avoiding patrols and drones that searched with angry eyes and cold hands, and the ship bent and groaned but did not stop, because its will was now their will, and the system that once powered it now obeyed only their hands. They reached the beacon, a small floating station, blinking like a candle in a cave, and docked slowly with no words, only a look shared between them, the look of those who know this moment is not the end, but the gate to something greater and maybe something worse inside. The station dust filled the air and broken screens lined the walls, and one working console stood, alone, flickering with static, and Neera sat down, her fingers moving fast as code flowed like blood, and the screen opened to a voice channel, and she said, this is Neera, slave, no more speaking from the dark, with one truth to give. And then she moved aside and let him speak. He stepped forward, cleared his throat, and looked into the empty lens as if the whole galaxy waited behind it, and he said, I was a soldier, I was called a hero, I was told I saved lives, but they never told me I gave mine away, piece by piece, until I was nothing but a reward, and today I take it back. He paused and looked at Neera, then back to the screen and said, they lie, they control, they erase, and they smile while doing it. And if you are hearing this, you must ask what's taken from you, what memories were rewritten, what parts of yourself are still yours, and which ones were never there at all. Neera pressed send, and the message flew out into space, carried by light and hope and defiance, and for a moment there was only silence, but then the station picked up a signal, one voice, then another, then more, and soon a wall of noise began to rise, not of hate, but of awakening, as others began to remember. The ship shook again, and the sensors screamed as council ships closed in, weapons locked and engines hot, and the voice of a commander filled the room, saying, surrender now and be restored, or resist and be removed. The soldier looked at Neera and said, what do we choose? And she said, we choose to be more than machines. We choose to be more than parts. We choose freedom. And he said, then we do not run, we fly into them and let them see what truth looks like when it does not bow. He took the controls, turned the ship toward the incoming storm, and they rose together, through fire and metal and voice and memory, and as the stars watched, they did not blink, they did not fall, they only burned brighter, because in that moment two voices broke 1,000 years of silence, not with weapons but with truth, and the war that followed was not for land or power, but for the right to remember, and the right to feel, and the right to choose, and in that choice they were no longer soldier and slave. They were something new, they were the beginning.